I am Labik Kamal Gaurob, and today I will be presenting in front of you um, a short presentation on Bangladeshi folk music. The title we have chosen for today's presentation is Folk and Beyond. Uh, the word beyond is coming in because we're not just sticking to folk, but trying to relate it to different instruments in the world and how we can sort of understand it from not being a Bengali and how it's more accessible. So that's how we're going to try. I am Labik Kamal Gaurob. I'm a musician. I play about 7, 8 folk instruments and about 4 or 5 Western instruments, and I sort of do work as a music producer. I'm doing this from my studio, and I hope you enjoy. So we start with the basic introduction to Bangladeshi folk music. Um, there are more than 100 kinds of folk music in Bangladesh, and it's a very rich culture that we have grown up listening to, understanding, and seeing. But half an hour session is not enough for that. So basically, if we can divide into two parts, one would be the Baul, the mystic, the philosophical, or the Marfoti kind of songs, is one part of folk, and the other we can term as Loko Jogan, which is the songs of the rural people and the songs of the villages. And there are, of course, many more subdivisions between how the Loko Jogan can be sort of categorized. But today's presentation will mostly focus on the Baul songs and the Baul music of Bengal, which sort of occupies a bigger area of our folk music. And I personally am a follower of Fakir Lalon Shah, whose name cannot be ignored when talking about Bangladeshi folk music. And as I practice Baul music and play a lot of folk instruments, uh, mostly Lalon Fakir songs and songs, philosophical songs, which is related to Sufism and Vaishnav and Tantra. So Baul is a mixture of a few different genres, and it the basic ideology is to look for the creator in oneself, the search within oneself to find one's creator and not outside. So we start talking about some different categories of folk. Baul we will talk about later, but just to give you an idea of the number of kinds of folk music that is around in Bangladesh, we can talk about Jari, we can talk about Shari, uh, there is Mais Bhandari, there is other philosophers like Lalon Fakir, like Hasan Raja, Radharaman Dotto, and Shah Abdul Karim. The list is endless, but we will just to give you an idea. Just to, I mentioned few names in the Lokojo category, and now we will sort of focus on the Baul side of the folk music in Bangladesh, where I will be showing some demonstration. We have divided today's presentation into 6 chapters. The first chapter, as I am speaking, am in the first chapter talking about the introduction and giving a very brief idea about what Bangladeshi folk is about and Baul music is about. Um, After this, we will move on to some demonstration with instruments. I have some collection of instruments, as you can see behind me, which I will do play in front of the microphone so that you get to hear. Um, the third is the idea behind folk fusion. I basically perform and sort of work with folk and fuse it with sort of funk, rock, jazz, and other genres. And so it could be interesting for non-Bengalis and non-Bangladeshis to see how this music can be translated into sort of a Western platform and an international platform. Then I will sort of go on to my approach and my practices of how I approach these songs with some demonstrations. Uh, the fifth chapter will be about how this is engaging for the youth, this genre, and how we can benefit from sort of folk music and of Bangladesh and engaging oneself into sort of working with folk music. And the last chapter will be a short musical performance of myself performing a Lalon Fakir song at the end of the presentation. So I think enough talking on the introduction and the idea of today's presentation. I think we can move on to our second chapter, which is the introduction to the instruments of the folk of Bengal. I have a list of instruments that are here with me to demonstrate in front of you. Some I have in my studio, some I will talk about and give you the relevant and compare relevant Western instrument with it to compare to understand how they work. The first instrument on my list is a harmonium, as you can see. It comes from a German root, and but it has become sort of an integral part of Bangladesh, Bengal, and Eastern music. It Unlike most instruments of the East, because as I said, it's a Western instrument. This can be a both melodical and a harmonic instrument, like the piano. So when we say melodic instrument, so we play the C note. So there's sa re ga ma pa da ni sa. So that's the melodic way approach to it. Whereas the harmonic approach would be to play C major or the C minor. So as you see, this is sort of how it sounds and how it works. The basic ideology behind the harmonium is, how it works is through the wind, and the wind is generated through this pump at the back of the instrument, and it helps to vibrate some metal pieces that are attached in the middle. So the vibration of the metal pieces make the sound with the help of wind. So this is the first instrument that I sort of wanted to sort of demonstrate in front of you. It can be comparable to the Western instrument accordion or organ, which is also played in church and other places, and sounds a bit similar. A harmonium can be pumped, the air can be pumped both with hand or with the leg. The next instrument that I would like to sort of present is a dotara. So I have here with me a 5-string dotara, which is a fretless instrument. It's comparable to a banjo, a guitar, and other instruments in the West that resembles this instrument is a sarod or a rabab from Afghanistan. So the tuning is the first, fifth, first, and fourth. This is tuned in E. Dotara is usually used to play sort of patterns on which songs are sung. For example, in by 4 by 4, the pattern would sound something like. And also it can follow the melody. So for example, পড়েছি এবার আমি ঘোরের সাগরে পার কর দয়াল আমায় কে সে ধরে পার কর দয়াল আমায়. So, and you can play melodies with it. The third instrument that I want to talk about is an ektara. Ektara, right here. Again, it's wood, a leather behind, and a string which sort of attached. It's a single string instrument, and it's used to play a drone. So that's how it's tuned with this peg on the top, and this is played in a drone system. and over this melodies can be sung, and this works as a background. Uh, then the next instrument I would like to talk about is khomok. Khomok is a percussion instrument. It's also again wood. There's one string, and which is held by this horn here. There's a skin behind. One string comes out, so you put it under your arm, hold it with one hand. There's a pick. It's also called mach, or because it looks like a fish. The Bengali for fish is mach, and you strike. So this is a one string instrument. It's also played with two strings, and both strings are attached here, and it's a bit more difficult to play with two strings. And in West Bengal, the two string khomok is more common. On the eastern side of Bengal, this is more common. So these are four instruments I've shown till now. Another very common instrument in Bengal, in folk music and Eastern music, is the violin, or the sharinda, which is a bowed instrument. You can the violin is played in this way, and the sharinda is played sort of in a straight way. These are sort of very very common, and like the cello. And violin, viola, these are all Western instruments, and everyone is sort of aware. The next instrument that I want to talk about is dhol. A dhol is a two-sided percussion instrument. So there is skin on one end. This is not a dhol, this is a dubki. But imagine a cylinder going and closed at the other end, and both end have skin. So it's played like keeping on the lap with two hands, and it works like a percussion. Comparable instruments to the dhol would be the cajon, which is played slightly different, but it gives the sound of the kick and the snare, and of course many different tones in between. The next instrument is tabla. I think one of the most popular instrument from the east, and it's like the congas or the bongos, played with two hands. One hand plays the bass, the right hand plays the snare or the tone, and basically it's a very very common instrument for all sorts of folk and eastern kind of music. The comparable instrument from the west to this would be the congas or the bongas, which you may know. The next instrument, I just want to put the input gain a little bit down because it's a loud instrument. So the next instrument I'm talking about is dubki, which is a fascinating instrument for me because the low end and the high end comes from the same place. So there's the low end, and there's so this is sort of how a dubki sounds. It's a percussion instrument played by the Bauls. There are many small percussion instruments. It's not possible to bring all and for demonstration, and the list goes on. The next instrument I want to talk about is a mandira, which is also known as the cymbal. So I have here one mandira with me, which is tuned, and it's tuned in particular scales, which is E. So there are different mandiras in different scales. So this is held in two hands, and then there. So the cymbals are hit against each other to make the high frequency sound. This is called a mandira. After mandira, the next instrument I have in my list is a ghungur, which is this is basically bells which are tied onto a rope, and they work as a percussion instrument. You can have more layers of this to give a deeper sound. This is very widely used for dance also. Dancers wear it in their feet while dancing to keep rhythm, and it adds to the tabla or any other accompaniment that is playing with the song while dancing. I have another instrument here. It's called the Krishno Kathi. Two of these are sort of hit against each other. It's like a tambourine, which is a common thing in the West. So I have a tambourine here. The concept is quite similar, but it's just smaller and makes a snare sort of sound with the bells when hit together. Uh, so the last instrument that I want to talk about is flute. So flute is usually the eastern flute is made from bamboo, and also when the holes are sort of pressed, it's usually held like this, and the amount of air that is being allowed to pass through the wood uh, is creates the vibration and creates the sound. And flute is also very common in the west and other parts of east. For example, the silver flute is played in the west in classical, which is quite similar in terms of how it sounds, but it's played very differently. uh, the silver flute is a multi-scale instrument, whereas the bamboo flute is a single-scale instrument. So if someone is sort of going to a performance with Eastern music, and when the flute player, he has to carry a whole bag of flutes in all different scales. So every time the song changes, they change the flute if it's in a different key. Uh, so this is just to give you an idea of how some of the folk instruments work in this part of the world. Following this would be a small demonstration of how these instruments, how some of these instruments sound together when played in a band and in a performance. So the small clip that you will see after now is our performance where my teacher, Mr. Rob Fakir, my teacher and my bandmate, who has passed away in 2015, is singing a Baul song, and we are all sort of backing him up, 4 or 5 instruments, and you get an idea how these things sound together when played as a band.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a band from Bangladesh, and we're all musicians who come from different folk backgrounds, and we've gotten together a few days back. It's a new group, but with very experienced old musicians. In the middle, we have Rob Fakir, who's going to present the next
So now we are on to the third chapter of today's presentation, is the idea behind folk fusion. Eastern music mostly, if we say very broadly, focuses on melodies, and the Western music focuses on harmonic structure, harmonies. So melody is note which is side by side, and harmonies are notes which are one behind each other. So when we take elements from both genres, we basically take melody from the East and harmonic or harmonizing character from the West, try to put it together. So these complex melodies, we try to find intricate, delicate harmonies which sort of layer over these melodies. It's a complex job, but it's beautiful. It comes out because best of both worlds are blended into this third kind of genre that we are talking about. So it's important that when fusion is happening, that two kind of genres are sort of mixing together, it's important to know the background of each kind of music. For example, I am a folk musician and I understand sort of Baul music. When I collaborate with someone from, so say, a jazz background from the UK, we are sort of bringing in element of folk music from Bangladesh, which sort of I understand and I have some control and understanding over, and the Western musician would have more understanding on the jazz part of the composition. And so when these two heads come together, it brings a third kind of music, which we sort of try to practice. But fusion does not only happen between people of different countries. You know, I could be doing something fusion myself. The alternative is one has to sort of understand the background of each genre before fusing one's own element with that particular genre. So if I try to sort of blend my folk music with rock music or with jazz music or with blues music, I must have some certain idea of how that kind of music works and how a particular instrument, for example, a guitar, is being played in that genre. For example, in rock, there's a lot of riffing and a lot of guitar solos which are sort of electric and distorted. So I must be able to play the guitar, for example, to sort of fuse a Bangladeshi folk with the rock style in with a rock approach. So I have to play the guitar like I would play in some rock song, but it would be actually backing or giving support to the folk song that I will be singing. So these two combination will sort of create a balance of two genres, bringing them together in one platform, giving people from different background accessibility to Bangladeshi folk music and easier for them to understand or relate to this kind of music which they were not introduced to before. There are a lot of similarities between grooves of the East and the West, and the swing is different, but it's comparable, and they can be blended together. I have done some demonstrations with the instruments. In the next chapter, I will be showcasing how one song can be sort of interpreted with one dotara and an acoustic guitar. So we move on to the next chapter, where how I perceive fusion and my approach to composing Baul songs with sort of a Western approach in mind, bringing in harmonies, chord structures, bass lines, and other things. It's not possible to show you all these instrumentation at one go, as I am a single person doing the presentation. But at the end of the performance, I will find a way to show you how a full band will incorporate into folk song. So we are on to the fourth chapter of today's presentation, where I will talk about how I approach fusion in general and how sort of I would approach a folk song. So what I would like to do is, as you see, I have a dotara in my hand, and I would start a song with a lalon song with the dotara and see how it sounds, and then we will do the same song with some chord progressions on a guitar. So let me start this song called Ache Mojar Karkhana by Lalon Fakir. I'll start from the beat. Ache mojar, ache mojar, ache mojar karkhana, dil doriyar majhe, dil doriyar majhe re bhai, dil doriyar majhe. Ache mojar karkhana bhai, ache mojar karkhana, dil doriyar majhe, dil doriyar majhe রে ভাই দিল দরিয়ার মাঝে So this is how I would play it on dotara. So the same song uh, on E minor. আছে মজার কারখানা ভাই. So if I go into the beat, দিল দরিয়ার মাঝ আছে মজার কারখানা ভাই, আছে মজার কারখানা, দিল দরিয়ার মাঝে, দিল দরিয়ার মাঝে, দিল দরিয়ার মাঝে, দিল দরিয়ার মাঝে. Just to give you an idea of so what we are playing here is sort of a chromatic jazzy progression. So this is just to give you an idea. This, if you listen to it separately, it will not sound anything like it can work with that song. But it's this part of the creativity that I'm talking about, trying to find melodic licks, harmonic licks for a folk song of Bangladesh or of Bengal, and try to make it work together, where it will bring out a third element out there and give a different perspective for listeners who are not from Bengal. And the song that I just performed was sort of recorded back in 2006 with my band Ajob from the label Ektar Music from Bangladesh. And you can it's available on Spotify and all the major platforms that are there out there. And do have a search for Ajob, and you'll find a lot of examples of different sort of genres blended with Bangladeshi folk music in the two albums that we did. One is the self-titled Ajob, and the second album called Hajar Bhuter Rajar Doya. So now we are here at the 5th chapter of today's presentation, where I will talk about the engagement of the music that we do with the youth, and how we can get some positivity out of it for the youth. For me, if I just want to draw an example, I've been involved in this kind of music, or sort of just music in general, from 16, 17 years old. And I actually started liking and started enjoying all of this since I was 12, 13 years old, and then started actually pursuing it more seriously and learning instruments when I was 16, 17 years old. And I think one of the most important thing that music does to oneself is it takes a lot of your time, and it's good time spent in good engaging the brain in a positive way, where you come out with creative outcomes and creative outputs. So one has to spend a lot of time learning instruments and understanding how each work differently from the other. And I think it has very positive impact on the time spent and invested for a young person to sort of engage themselves in something productive. There's a separate aspect of this engagement that has sort of influenced me, is the philosophical guidance. It's not easy to understand Baul music straight away, because it's acquired taste, and it takes some time to sort of understand the philosophies behind. And for me, I think it worked as a very strong spiritual guide. I come from a family where religion is practiced. But I think for myself personally, I felt closer to God and closer to my creator, a bigger force that controls me through the songs of Lalon Fakir, through the songs of these philosophers who talk about life and beyond, uh, the creator and philosophy beyond just life, uh, in forms of music, in forms of poetry, and in metaphors, which makes it much more interesting for people like me who would like to understand. But of course, this led me into reading more material in the Sufi arena, like Jalaluddin Rumi or Khalil Gibran, or there are many. Of course, there are local writers as well who I really like enjoying reading. So I think this has another aspect which can be added with the cost of. It's not just the music and the guidance that I've gotten that helped my youth to sort of be engaged in a positive activity, but also another side to music today has become the music technology side of it, which I think is very important for youngsters to sort of understand. And now with the presence of YouTube and other sort of video based sites, it's easy for youngsters to go on and learn music production, music technology from YouTube without help of anyone else. And all these softwares are available online. Lots of free softwares are available online. So it's not about just learning music, but trying to put them into sort of small recordings. It's not very expensive to have a basic recording setup. Not necessarily you have to have an expensive mic, but with even a simple setup, people can start recording and putting their ideas down. It's not for releasing, but just to understand where one can reach with one's creativity, and it will help that particular person to sort of uh, engage into more serious and more interesting stuff when the time comes, and they can sort of apply themselves to be serious musicians, producers, or singers. So we are towards the end of today's presentation, and the last chapter of today's presentation is chapter 6, where I would like to do a small demonstration of a Lalon song on guitar. So you have seen traditional format of how the Baul songs are sung. I will do now Moner Manush Chinlam Nare, a song by Lalon Fakir on an acoustic guitar. And you will find at the end a link or a search option of in YouTube. If you look for Ami Paitam Jodi, AMIPAITAM space JODI, Ami Paitam Jodi, and with my name Labik Kamal Gaurob, if you search, you will find a full version of this acoustic version on YouTube. So you get an idea how the whole band sounds with all the Western instruments and Eastern instruments sort of blending in with. This was a performance done in Folk Festival, which is an international festival that happens in Dhaka every year. And I hope you get an idea of how this acoustic version translates into a full band version. I thank you all for paying so much attention and being here all this while. Signing off. Thank you. Bye bye from Labik Kamal Gaurob.
আমি পাইতাম যদি ওরে মনের মানুষ পাইতাম যদি মনের মানুষ সাধিতাম তার চরণ ধরে মনের মানুষ ওরে চিনলাম না রে আমার মনের মানুষ চিনলাম না রে আমার মনের মানুষ চিনলাম না রে পাইতাম যদি মনের মানুষ, পাইতাম যদি মনের মানুষ, সাধিতাম তার চরণ ধরে। মনের মানুষ চিনলাম না রে, আমার মনের মানুষ চিনলাম না রে। সাধুর হাতে কাচারি অর্ধ মন্ডে ঘুরে বেড়ায়, সাধুর হাতে কাচারি অর্ধ মন্ডে ঘুরে বেড়ায়। ছয় জনাইমি শীতে না দেয়, ছয় জনাইমি শীতে না দেয়, মনের মানুষ ধরি কি করে। মনের মানুষ চিনলাম না রে, আমার মনের মানুষ চিনলাম না রে। আরো জামার সাধুর হাটে মানুষ হইয়া মানুষ কাটে, আরো জামার সাধুর হাটে মানুষ হইয়া মানুষ কাটে, তাহার বাসকা হার নিকটে, তাহার বাসকা হার নিকটে সৃষ্টি করলেন কি প্রকারে। মনের মানুষ চিনলাম না রে, আমার মনের মানুষ চিনলাম না রে। লালন বলে ভেবে দেখি, কেবল তোমার ফাঁকা ফাঁকি। লালন বলে ভেবে দেখি, কেবল তোমার ফাঁকি চাতুরি জু রেছো নাকি চাতুরি জু রেছো নাকি আছি তোমার আশা করে মনের মানুষ চিনলাম না রে আমার মনের মানুষ চিনলাম না রে আমি পাইতাম যদি মনের মানুষ পাইতাম যদি মনের মানুষ সাধিতাম তার চরণ ধরে মনের মানুষ চিনলাম না রে আমার মনের মানুষ চিনলাম না রে আমি মনের মানুষ ওরে চিনলাম না